Welcome everyone to 5 Minutes of American Literature. Let's look at one of the most common character types in the literature of the new American Republic, the Republican hero. Early American literature gives us a lot of texts that grapple with the definition of Americanness, and we can see some common features in what these writers considered central to this national identity: a spirit of independence, a skepticism of rules and social norms, a belief in one's social equality among men, but also a neighborly sense of civic responsibility to the extent that it doesn't compromise one's authentic individual self. Perhaps the best example of this model is Benjamin Franklin, as he presents himself in his autobiography. Franklin conducts his personal life according to the principle of enlightened self-interest, a theory that the fortunes of the individual and the community are interdependent. While Franklin is devoted to making his own fortune, he knows that he can't succeed on his own. He works hard and invests his time and money wisely, but he also uses whatever connections he has to advance his career and reputation. In turn, he uses his good fortune to improve his community so that others may have some of the advantages that he did. To him, it's good civics and good business to pay it forward. A rising tide will lift all boats, including his own. However, this model of American identity takes a turn after the Revolution. When the people of the new United States broke away politically from their parent nation, we start to see more distance and even opposition between the literary heroes of the early Republic and the communities of their birth. More frequently, we see stories and essays in which settled society is something to escape, rather than something to invest in. At worst, it functions as a sort of prison that makes men soft and submissive and bends them to its will. By contrast, the hero of these works, the real American, is fiercely independent and anti-authority. He refuses to bind himself to the rules of civilization, and he often prefers to retreat to nature where he can be his authentic self and live by his own rules. He abandons settled society and thus retains his autonomy and manhood. Case in point, Natty Bumppo, aka Hawkeye, in James Fenimore Cooper's Leatherstocking series. In the scene in The Last of the Mohicans, in which we meet Bumppo for the first time, he defies categorization. He's white, as he reminds us, in case we didn't get it the first several times, but he's dressed as an Indian. He is close friends with the Mohicans, and their relationship seems to be based in mutual respect. He trades and associates with all the societies of Western New York, but he doesn't really belong to any of them. Instead, he lives independently as a hunter who survives on the bounty of the woods and recognizes no law outside his own moral code. He has credible criticisms of British colonization and reasons for leaving colonial society, but he's also willing to lend his British associates the aid of his Indian connections and his knowledge of the woods, as long as he can do it on his own terms. Bumppo is exactly the kind of drifting frontiersman who Quebecois treats with mild contempt, but in the context of early 19th century literature, he is presented as a hero whose autonomy gives him strength and nobility. Not every literary treatment of the Republican hero was as glowing as what we see in The Last of the Mohicans. Despite being one of the first world-famous American writers, Washington Irving was a bit skeptical of American nationhood and the anti-authority impulses that he saw in the new United States. We see this skepticism peek out in both The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle, his two most well-known works. In Sleepy Hollow, Ichabod Crane represents all the softness of domestic society that American men are supposed to reject, but his rival Brom Bones does not stand out as particularly noble. Unlike Crane, he is strong and athletic and a leader of men, but he's also a bully with a disturbing mean streak. At the end of the story, we're left to infer that Brom has chased Crane out of town in the disguise of the Headless Horseman, which leaves Brom free to marry the town heiress while Crane disappears entirely. In Rip Van Winkle, our protagonist is presented as a likable guy who isn't really attached to anything in his community. He doesn't like working, he can't manage the farm, his wife is a nag. Instead of becoming a more reliable citizen and husband, he abandons his responsibilities at home and retreats to the woods, where he can do as he pleases. When Rip falls into a 20-year time warp on one of these trips, he returns to his village to find his children grown, his wife dead, and his community under new government management. Rip is finally completely free and spends the rest of his days hunting, puttering, and telling stories of the colonial days. In these two stories, should we admire any of these guys? How are men like these going to build a unified nation? The best summary of the Republican hero ethos is probably in Emerson's essay Self-Reliance. Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. And this declaration opens an interesting set of questions about this model of American identity as it appears in the nation's early literature. What does it mean to be free? How do you build a society for people who romanticize resistance to civil society? Throughout American literature, we see tension between individual rights and the public good when it comes to American identity. But in the early 19th century, we see the pendulum swing hard toward individualism. Thank you for watching, and please come back to this video later in the semester as well, because we will see these themes again.